Welcome to Uncensored Beat.
I showed up. U.S. citizen is not permitted entry.
Over the next big attack.
Zelensky's seemingly fraudulent election.
Bilateral security agreement President Joe Biden signed.
Quebec, the communist capital of North America.
What do Ukrainians think about US? Some believe that the US is to blame for this war.
Welcome back to Uncensored Beat, where you're going to find the unfiltered truth. My name is James Bradley.
And I'm Flor Blanco.
And welcome to this next episode. We have a very special guest with us today. Chris, I'm gonna screw your last name up, but we have Chris with us, and Flor will make introductions. Go ahead, Flor.
Yes, hi. We have Chris Chmielenski. Is that right? Did I get it right? All right.
You got it right. Nice job.
Hey, well, those Russian classes in college paid off. That's all I can say. So, Chris, I understand you're with the Immigration Accountability Project. So, are you actually centered in DC or somewhere else?
So I am located along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but I did work up in the DC area for about 15 years. And then we have several of our other staff members are based in the DC area. So our primary focus is on federal immigration policy. So yes, we do have a significant presence there. And I just go back and forth between where I am down on the Gulf Coast in the DC area a couple times per month.
Mm-hmm. I imagine you're a busy man. Can you give us a quick background on the IAP?
Sure. So the Immigration Accountability Project is a fairly new group. We started this up right around the start of this year and actually played a pretty instrumental role in derailing the Senate border bill, which came up in January. We weren't expecting to hit the theme that quickly, but the opportunity presented itself, so we were able to throw ourselves into that. But both myself and our co-founder, my other co-founder, I'm one of the co-founders, the other co-founder, Rosemary Jinks, her and I combined, we've got decades worth of experience working on the issue. I've been working on the issue for almost 20 years. Rosemary's been working on it for about 30 years. So we're pretty familiar. We know immigration policy inside and out. We know the games that have been played in Washington for years and years to come. And what we wanted to do, especially given the rise of partisanship, not just in Washington, D.C., but particularly on this issue, we just felt that we would be better served trying to accomplish the legislative goals that we seek to accomplish, would be better served by focusing all of our attention on Congress, which we were not able to necessarily do with our former roles. So now, like I said, we're 100% focused on Congress, and our main mission is to keep voters educated on the actions, votes, and statements of their members of Congress, because as we all know, members of Congress tend to say one thing, but then their actions in Congress do something that's very, very different. So that's something that we're really going to keep an eye on, and we want to expose. So if you have a member of Congress, for example, who says that we need to do one thing on immigration, and that particular individual gets a lot of credit for the statements that they made, but then their voting record looks very different, we want to expose that by providing that information in an easy to find a way for the public to find that, so then they can hold their members accountable.
That's excellent, Chris. I'm glad you're pointing to that point, because that's been one of the biggest concerns of as a candidate, but also as a citizen, to find out how the promises made never kept. So I'm glad you have some checks and balances in there, and of course a place for the public to go to find out the voting records.
Yeah, and what we've done is we just recently launched this week. In fact, we launched a new section on our website called our Membership Accountability Resources, which for now we're just providing every single immigration related action bill that's been introduced in Congress, along with who sponsored it, who the co-sponsors are, what votes have been taken on that legislation, just to provide as comprehensive of a record for each of these members of Congress as we possibly can. Like I said, right now, we just have votes, sponsorships, and co-sponsorships, but we plan on building it out by including video clips of members of Congress speaking on the issue, press releases that they put out, and other statements that they make that they're quoted on in the press.
And Chris, can you tell us why you decided to get involved?
Well, like I said, I've been involved with this issue for almost 20 years now. It was something that eh, I somewhat got into the issue for a little bit of a different reason. What I was finding was at the time I was living in an area that was actually growing at one of the fastest rates in the country, and that growth was primarily driven by immigration, and the schools weren't able to keep up with it. Public resources weren't able to keep up with it. Taxpayer the funds going into the city, into the county, they were strained because they simply didn't have the funds to handle this massive influx of people that were coming to settle there. And it caused me to kind of take a step back and look a little bit closer at this immigration issue. And then again, the group that I worked with before co-founding the Immigration Accountability Project, they were really at the time one of the really the leading group in looking into the causes and the impacts that our current federal immigration policies have on just the American way of life, the quality of life, the ability for native-born workers and even naturalized Americans to green card holders that now have U.S. citizenship, their ability to be able to find jobs and have increasing wages, things like that. Just overall look at the entire big picture of our immigration policies impacts on the United States. So that's what really got me into it. And again, the reason why I decided to found the Immigration Accountability Project was just because there was really no group that just singularly focused on what Congress did on a day-to-day basis. There are a number of groups out there that do it that it's part of their mission, but it's not their entire mission. We just wanted to have one group that's the only thing that we're focused on is what are these members of Congress doing? What are they saying? What actions are they taking? And make sure that their statements, and especially during a campaign season, the statements that they're making to the voters, do those actually end up matching the actions that they take when push comes to shove? And the other thing, too, that's very important is exposing the actions that they aren't taking, because that can be just as significant as the actions that they are taking. There's so many things that they can do on immigration that Congress just hasn't done in the last 2 decades. We do have a Capitol Hill presence. We have a policy director. We have a director of government relations as well. So as part of our mission, yes, we're educating members of Congress and their staffers on this immigration issue. Again, it's a pretty dense set of policy for the federal government. A lot of people just seem to think, well, there's the border, and there's so much focus on the border and illegal immigration, they don't think of all the other aspects. But you have this alphabet soup of guest worker programs. Another resource that we provide on our website is we just have an overview of what the U.S. immigration system looks like. I mean, you've got basically 3 different categories. You've got the people that come in illegally. You've got the green card holders. Those are the people who actually go through the process and are on path to become U.S. citizens. And then you have the guest. Then you have the temporary visitors, and that group includes not just guest workers, but it also includes tourists. It includes foreign students. And at any given one time, you can have 40, 50 million foreign-born individuals living in the United States. That's a lot of people. It has a huge impact on, again, the nation's overall. It has an impact on pretty much everything within our government's hands. You think of its impacts on education. You think of its impact on public services. Its impact on roads and highways and bridges. Jobs, again, there's a huge economic impact that is created or results from our current immigration policies. So there's a lot of different areas to get into. A lot of staffers, again, might not be familiar with all the different, not just the different programs within our immigration system, but the different processes as well, and also the impacts that they have on some of these other issues.
So let's go ahead and turn specifically to the upcoming election and the concerns of non-citizens related to that. So why should we care if non-citizens vote?
Well, for every non-citizen that casts a vote in the United States, it cancels the vote of a U.S. citizen. And I think that's the most significant reason. How can you say your vote matters when the federal government is willing to just somewhat just look away from the fact that there may be non-citizens able to vote in the United States. And again, why this is an immigration issue, why myself and the Immigration Accountability Project think this is an important issue is because the non-citizen population in the United States is driven by immigration policy here in the US. And you're seeing that under the current Biden-Harris administration. We've had a massive influx of non-citizens enter the country due to the administration's border policies. And those are all individuals who could register to vote. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will vote, but you have all of these individuals there. They have access to the documents that are needed in 19 states. An illegal alien can receive a driver's license. Any illegal alien that has received parole through the Biden-Harris administration is eligible to receive an employment authorization document. The moment you get an employment authorization document or a work permit, you can then obtain a social security card. You get a social security card and a driver's license, you can do a lot of things here in the United States, including register to vote. And if you look at the National Voter Registration Form, it simply includes just a box to attest to the fact that you are a US citizen. Some of these individuals, the English is probably not their first language. And if they've got some of these NGOs or other individuals that are giving them these forms and telling them just to fill it out, it becomes very easy for them to register to vote. If you have a system that easily allows these individuals to register to a vote, then you raise the risk that they actually will vote. And again, every single time a non-citizen vote, it cancels out the vote of a US citizen.
How are non-citizens endangered by illegal votes?
Any non-citizen that casts a vote risks deportation. They can also be charged with a criminal act. So there are pretty serious consequences to voting. And I would advise if you're in the country and not a US citizen that you don't try to vote, because it may end up getting prosecuted at some point in time. And we do have some examples of non-citizens actually voting in federal elections. You've seen some reporting throughout some of the news outlets. The Washington Times has done a piece. Fox News has showed some stories and interviewed some foreign citizens that have voted who are not US citizens who have voted in US federal elections. So it has been an issue in the past. Is it widespread? It's probably not widespread at this point yet, but again, by allowing non-citizens to register to vote or to keep the bar low to allows non-citizens the possibility to register to vote, it creates additional risk that they will actually vote in these elections. And unfortunately, we have some individuals that are out there that want them to vote. And what they're going to do is they're not going to tell them what the penalties might be if they do vote, but they should know, especially people who are green card holders or ever hope to become a green card holder. Because if you're a green card holder, or if you hope of becoming a green card holder, you can lose your shot at US citizenship by voting in a US federal election.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Chris, because we've been plagued with the motor voter roll law here in California. You go to apply and you get your driver's license, it automatically default puts you in and allows you to vote in California elections. Now, normally we've had a bit back and forth up in Sacramento with some of the cities allowing non-citizens to hold office, which of course we don't have a legal argument for statewide issues, but the federal ones is very clear. It's written in the Constitution. So I'm glad you bring it to the attention. Because even though with my series of past elections that I've run in, I've worked with law enforcement, put up boards and notifications of those illegals or non-citizens. If they were to vote, they would be deported in the federal election. So there's that element. There's a lot of mis and disinformation and just not knowledge at all. So I'm glad you're bringing it up for those that are listening in that has a family member that is currently residing in the state that's not an official U.S. citizen. That is the risk you run if they vote.
Right. And you bring up a good point. There are municipalities both in California, some in Illinois, some in New York, and some other municipalities across the country that have allowed non-citizens to vote in their local elections. But when you're talking about federal elections, while the states are allowed to manage the process, the rules still come from the federal government. But unfortunately, we do have the National Voter Registration Act, which has made it more accessible for the good for people to register to vote here in the United States, but it's also created a situation where it makes it very easy for a state or for a non-citizen to be able to register to vote. Because again, not only can illegal aliens obtain a driver's license in 19 states, California being one of them, but there are also a lot of other non-citizens who are in the country legally. So you have, think of a foreign student who may be attending UCLA or USC. That individual is able to get a driver's license. That individual is able to possibly get a social security number, and they may also be able to easily register to vote. But again, if they were to vote in a federal election, they risk losing their visa and being deported.
So stand by. We have to pay our bills here. So listen to our sponsors, and we'll be right back with you.
Welcome to Uncensored Beat.
I showed up. U.S. citizen is not permitted entry.
Cover the next big attack.
Zelensky's seemingly fraudulent election.
Bilateral security agreement President Joe Biden signed.
Quebec, the communist capital of North America.
What do Ukrainians think about US? Some believe that the US is to blame for this war.
I'm very curious to see some of the ballots that are being distributed to non-citizens in those municipalities. I mean, so much potential for entrapment for allowing the non-citizen to vote and cast a vote where they're not legally eligible for it, and that's a big deal. So I'm just curious. So how can non-citizens protect themselves from this issue?
The safest thing would be not to register to vote, not to put yourself into that place. You do have to, for a non-citizen as well, if they're filling out the national voter registration form, there is the box saying that you are a U.S. citizen. You check that box and you sign the bottom. You've just perjured yourself on a federal form. So there are risks to that as well. Now, there are other ways that you can register to vote. Each state has its own individual process. A state like California, again, where in some municipalities you do allow non-citizens to vote in your local elections. This sets up a difficult situation because obviously the local officials want them to register to vote there, but you have to make sure that they're not getting registered to vote for a federal election. So it's a little bit tricky. It would be just a heck of a lot easier if municipalities wouldn't allow non-citizens to vote in their local elections and would just restrict all elections in the United States at all levels, both federal, local, and state, just restrict those simply to U.S. citizens. But unfortunately, that's not reality right now. So you have to come up with other ways. So I think that the best piece of advice to non-citizens is just simply don't put yourself at risk. Don't register to vote. If anybody hands you a form and tells you, oh, it's okay, you can just fill this out, or even if they've already pre-filled the form out for you and they just want you to sign it, don't do it. Don't register to vote here in the United States. It reduces the risk upon you. You never know what future administrations are going to be like, how future administrations will enforce this law, or what laws Congress may pass to prevent it or even strengthen the current laws that we currently have on the books to even make the penalty even harsher. So the best way to protect yourself if you're a non-citizen is simply not to register to vote. And if you did accidentally register to vote, you can always contact your state's election officials and tell them to remove you from the list because you're not a U.S. citizen. And then, of course, the best thing would be just to not actually go vote.
Wouldn't it be nice to set up a crisis hotline saying, hey, listen, I was approached by this particular NGO. And by the way, here's the information. They're giving us false information. Because the way I look at this, Chris, is they're setting them up to be deported. That's the end result if they're caught.
It really is. And if we know that there are NGOs that are providing voter registration forms to non-citizens. The most widely publicized example was when a congresswoman from New York City, Nicole Maliotakis, got a hold of the official contract between the city of New York and an NGO that was providing shelter to illegal border crossers who were being resettled in the city. And as part of that contract, the NGO had to provide those individuals with voter registration forms. So we know that the NGOs are providing the voter registration forms to the individuals. We also know that President Biden signed an executive order early on in his administration ordering all federal agencies to do everything that they can to publicize registering to vote and to provide voter registration forms to everybody that they come into contact with. That means everybody who works at the Department of Homeland Security in the three major immigration agencies, Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. So every individual that all those three agencies that come into contact with, and many of them are non-citizens, under the executive order, they're supposed to provide them with at least voter registration education information, if not the voter registration form itself. So we know that there are people that are putting these forms into the hands of the people. I just wish that they would also advise those people, hey, I'm giving you this form because I have to, but understand the consequences if you do actually vote. Unfortunately, I think there are some bad actors out there who want these people to register to vote and to actually vote in the elections. Because when you're talking about you look back at the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections, you got a handful of states where the margin for victory was only 10, 20,000 votes. It doesn't take much to turn these elections around. Remember, a 20,000 vote margin only means 10,000 votes needs to flip. So it doesn't take much to reverse the outcome of these national elections. So there may be some bad actors that are promoting it. I wish they wouldn't. But again, we have evidence that they are. So again, it would be in the best interest of a non-citizen to just know what the laws are and know how it impacts you. Because again, there may be U.S. citizens that are trying to endanger you, because at the end of the day, they don't care if you get deported.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you're protecting the non-citizens. I love this angle. I love it. This is the message we need to get out there loud and clear to those that are even considering or have been coerced into. So thank you. That's amazing work, Chris. And I think we just got to reshape the message saying, hey, we're here to protect you, not to block you from, overextending your visit or perhaps even doing something unlawful.
No, I agree. And I know you two have talked about finding ways to publicize it yourself. The Immigration Accountability Project, our website is iaproject.org. We work with the Only Citizens Vote Coalition. Their website is onlycitizensvotecoalition.com. Both of our websites have forms that you can print out that can be posted in different languages that actually say, if you're a non-citizen and you vote in a U.S. election, here are the potential penalties that you could face, including the deportation and the criminal charges. So those are available. Of course, you have to check your local laws and regulations to find out where you can actually post those signs. But we've got those resources available for anybody that wants to help out.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, that's great information to know. So I'm just curious, do you know how big this problem is of non-citizens voting?
So the non-citizen voting, it's hard to track down. Basically, you have to look at self-admission. And from that, there's not much more than a handful of stories. There's a couple of prosecuted cases. Unfortunately, this isn't something that the federal government is actually prosecuting on a regular basis, if at all. In fact, I think there haven't been any prosecutions of illegal voting by the federal government, at least for non-citizens voting in elections in quite a long time. So because we don't have any case law to look back at, we just basically have to rely on journalists who have been able to find non-citizens who have admitted that they have voted in federal elections. So again, there is a collection of stories, but I think, again, the big risk here is that it is pretty easy for a non-citizen to get registered to vote. They have the documentation and they have the access to the voter registration forms to complete them. If they're just willing to sign the box or check the box that says they're a US citizen, or just simply don't know any better because of a language barrier or for some other reason, it becomes pretty simple. And we know based on reports from states, you look at Texas, Virginia, Ohio. These are just some of Virginia is another one. These are just some of the states that have cleared thousands of non-citizens off of their voter rolls in recent weeks. So we know that non-citizens are registering. If they can register, then you run the risk of them actually voting in the election.
So I don't know how familiar you are with what has been going on in California. So recently there was state legislation where I believe our state had offered, I think, is it $150,000, up to $150,000
for the housing stipends?
Housing, yes, stipends, yes.
Right.
Non-citizens,
right.
On top of a lot of other welfare support that's given to non-citizens. So it seems to me, at least in California, there's definitely a growing, or actually, I should say, a decrease in the understanding of the benefits of citizenship. Because the line between the citizen and the non-citizen seems to be diminishing year by year, unfortunately, especially within our state. So what would you say to the people watching here is the benefit of being a U.S. citizen today?
That's a hard one. Given current circumstances, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of extra added benefit between being a U.S. citizen in the United States right now and a non-citizen. I would say probably the biggest benefit would be access to federal benefits. Some of the reason why you have states like California and Illinois and New York that are aggressively passing legislation to open up state benefits to people who are in the country illegally or just non-citizens. They all fall under the same larger bucket. One of the reasons why they're doing that is they're doing it because they can't access some of the federal benefits. But so there is still that line of demarcation between a U.S. citizen and a non-citizen. But again, there are loopholes within that system as well. The federal government is still providing some aid to people that are either in the country legally or illegally, but are non-citizens. So there are some forms of aid that they're still providing. And so in terms of straight benefits, if we're not going to strengthen our laws to prevent them from voting in U.S. elections, and we're not going to make sure that taxpayer-funded benefits from U.S. taxpayers are going to non-citizens, then I can't say that there's a whole lot that differentiates a U.S. citizen between a non-citizen right now.
Yes.
A passport, that's about it.
Let me comment on that.
Okay,
I just want to say, I am a first generation naturalized immigrant. And so I arrived here when I was 1 and I was naturalized at age 12. So it took 11 years of very hard work. My parents, it's not as big of a terrible story as some of the other immigrants, but they did flee the Philippines to escape what they believed encroaching socialism, which actually resulted in the loss of their jobs in a newspaper, because the first things they wanted to take out when they want to take over the country is definitely media. And so through a process of, I guess, the U.S. Offering jobs to foreign citizens. At that time, my father got his citizenship. But either way, what I want to share is I remember the very long lines at the LA Immigration Center. I remember having to wait 12 hours with my parents to fill out paperwork that I didn't know. But their day finally came where I was told I had to sign this piece of paper, which is my naturalization certificate. And I had to sign it twice because I just learned cursive, And I remember that day, and I remember the flag that my parents were given the day they were naturalized. It was a big deal, and they were so proud to be citizens. And I guess it's just disheartening to me that there are many people that are born into this country. I would even have to submit even my own children that don't understand the value of that. And I would want, I guess, for the next president of the US and even our governors to maybe even really focus on, what is the value of being a citizen in the US? I lived it. I love it, and I wouldn't want to leave this country. So I just want to submit that and share that with everyone.
And everyone, thank you so much. And Chris, thank you for taking time and educating our public here about what you're doing and what they can do. Everyone, please watch this, share it with everyone, subscribe, and let's get this message out to everyone. Thank you for watching. See you soon.
Welcome to Uncensored Beat.
I showed up. U.S. citizen is not permitted entry.
Cover the next big attack.
Zelensky's seemingly fraudulent election.
Bilateral security agreement President Joe Biden signed.
Quebec, the communist capital of North America.
What do Ukrainians think about US? Some believe that the US is to blame for this war.